Hello and welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show. I'm your host, Sharon Harding, and today we're checking out an award-worthy AMD Ryzen PC, as well as breaking down our latest GPU face-off.
Nice.
Yeah, so we are live, everybody, and we are taking questions from the audience. So as always, if you have something you'd like to ask, just drop the question into the chat on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll try to discuss it on air. So joining me today, we have Tom's Hardware staff writer, Michelle Earhart. How are you, Michelle?
Hi, Sharon. I'm great. How are you?
Doing well, too. We also have Tom's Hardware senior GPU editor, Jared Walton. What's up, Jared?
Not much, just kicking it. I'm gonna take off early to go and get the vaccine today. That's my V for vaccine.
Oh, congrats. I guess we'd call that wetware.
Yeah, I'm gonna get upgraded or something.
Nice.
Maybe they can overclock me at the same time. Yeah.
Well, while we have you, Jared, I know this week you took a couple flagships, NVIDIA's GeForce RTX 3090, and then on the AMD side, the Radeon RX 6900 XT, and you put them head to head to do a comparison, different categories. So which card came out alive, and what can you tell us about this face-off?
Hey, they're both still alive, actually. We've got them right here. You've got the AMD 6900 XT. Oh, I should probably turn off my blur effect, huh? Give me a second there.
There's no privacy in GPUs, Jared.
That's right. What in the world did I just click?
I'm sure our
missed what I was aiming for.
I'm sure our commenters are very happy to see these GPUs like in your hands and not at all jealous.
Yes, I know. I'm like, I could pull out like several 3080s, 3090s. I don't know. So you got the big old fat monster here. And then the slightly less massive 6900 XT. The 3900, it is so heavy. Like, it's over 2 kilograms if I remember right. So it's just a chunky card. Anyway, the big news is they're both fast and they're both super overpriced. But if you could find one, I mean, like, so Newegg does these Newegg shuffles. We've been covering that. I actually have looked at their prices there. I'm like, it's funny that the AMD cards are going for higher premiums than the NVIDIA cards. I'm not sure why that is. Like the 6700 XT is nominally a $479 card. Currently sells for around $900, I think. No, Newegg's price is like $800 to $900. Scalpers, it's a little bit more than that. But then like the 3070, which is actually faster than the 6700 XT, Newegg's price is like $700 for if you win the shuffle, which of course is not at all a given. I actually did win the shuffle last week, but then I didn't buy the 3060 Ti that I won. I do it mostly because I'm curious. I'm like, will I ever get selected? And so after, I don't know, 30 times or something entering, I finally won the shuffle. So that's my claim to fame now. Anyway, 6900 XT versus the 3090. So nominally, you've got a $1,000 AMD card and a $1,500 NVIDIA card. Actual online pricing, like if you got it off the Newegg Shuffle, it's like $2,200 for the 3090 and maybe like $1,500 for the 6900 XT. It kind of varies. Both very expensive. And if it were any other time, we'd just be like rolling our eyes going, no one should buy a $1,500 graphics card. But apparently people are willing to pay that. So anyway, performance depends on what you look at, like which one's faster. If you're doing professional apps, there's a lot of apps that run better on the NVIDIA 3090. It's got more memory, it's got more memory bandwidth, it's got better professional driver support on certain apps because NVIDIA does that sort of thing, right? But then you go over to like SpecViewPerf, and there's certain apps where the 6900 XT comes out on top because AMD doesn't tend to limit things on professional applications as much as NVIDIA. But if we focus just on gaming, then it's like the 3090 wins by a small margin. Actually, if you want to pull up like the 1440p chart, we can show that off there. So this is 1440p ultra settings across what is that, 13 games. And if you go down the list, like NVIDIA wins most of them, but then you get things like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where AMD comes in quite a bit ahead, and that seems to be purely a optimization thing, where AMD promoted the game, and whatever they've done, they just perform quite a bit faster in it. NVIDIA caps out at much lower frame rates than the AMD cards in Valhalla. Same thing kind of happens with Borderlands 2. You go on to other games, it's like Division 2, that's an NVIDIA, or that's an AMD game as well, but it favors NVIDIA. So is Far Cry 5. But overall, if you look at the 13 game average, you can see they're like running neck and neck. So you go, okay, well, they're basically tied, and the AMD card is a lot cheaper, right? And then you go, well, not so fast, because ray tracing is kind of picking up steam, and I know it's not like the be all end all, and there's games where it makes a big difference, or a bigger difference, and then there's games like, I would say, Dirt 5 and Riftbreaker, it makes more of a difference, but Dirt 5 and World of Warcraft, Shadowlands, and the other AMD one, which is called Godfall, they only use ray tracing for shadows, and that's like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and I kind of just shrug at it and I go, slightly better shadows just doesn't do it for me. But I included them, so if you flip over to like our 1440p or 1080p ray tracing benchmarks, let's see if we can do that.
One moment. 1080p ray tracing. Here
there you go. So this is at native resolution, and suddenly, like, NVIDIA just creams AMD. Like at 1440p, or no, minimum frame rates here are better than average frame rates when comparing the 3090 and the 6900 XT. And this is almost across all games. So, if you care about DirectX ray tracing, you think that's the future, NVIDIA really has an advantage. And then if you flip over to one more chart, we get the DLSS results. And it makes a bad situation worse, because here, and this is DLSS quality mode. So this is like the highest quality ray tracing, or highest quality DLSS mode, where it's 2x upscaling. And in practice, I'm like, you can't really tell the difference between that and native. Like, there's very minor differences, but in motion, like, I don't think anyone's going to care about the slight loss in image quality. Other things might actually look better with DLSS, and the free frame rate performance jump is definitely worth it. And so it's like with DLSS in quality mode, obviously AMD doesn't run DLSS, so it's just running at native resolution, and you're like, oh man, it's like 2, sometimes 3 times the performance. That's like a huge gap. And DLSS isn't just for ray tracing. There's a bunch of games where it's supported. Trying to think off the top of my head what comes to mind. Death Stranding, it's supported. It's not even really necessary in Death Stranding because it runs pretty well even at native 4K on a lot of GPUs, but there's other games where it's supported too, and it gives a nice boost. Outsiders, I think it has it. Anthem had it. I don't know. Those aren't great games in my opinion, but so that's kind of how it sits. We've got 1440p ray tracing results as well, where it's kind of the same story. Like, the numbers change, but the actual margins of victory are a similar situation, where NVIDIA is, I want to say, at native rendering. Let me see if I've actually got the numbers so I can give you exact percentages. At native rendering, NVIDIA's 3090 is about almost 50% faster than the 6900 XT. If you turn on DLSS of the games that we tested, it ends up being nearly 3 times as fast. It's 182% faster, so 2.8 times as fast across the tested games. Huge difference in performance, huge difference in experience. I do need to look at some of the results a little closer. Minecraft DirectX ray tracing at 1080p actually didn't seem to work right on AMD. It seemed like it hit a frame rate cap that I'm still investigating. But basically, NVIDIA's been doing this for 2.5 years. AMD's been, or 3 years almost, no, 2.5. And and AMD's only been doing it for like, I guess 6 months if we're being generous, 5 months, and so they've got more games out there. They've got more experience with it. Their hardware is faster at ray tracing, and I think going forward, it's a safe bet that NVIDIA is going to continue to hold a substantial lead in ray tracing. So that's like the performance side of things. Price goes to AMD. Power efficiency, I think I called it a wash because you've got the 3090 is a 350 watt TGP total graphics power. The 6900 XT is a 300 watt TGP. But in practice, it's like, well, if you buy the reference cards, you kind of stick pretty close to those TGP, TDP ratings. If you buy a third-party aftermarket card, not aftermarket, but third-party manufacturer card with factory overclocks, I think you kind of throw caution to the wind, and both of them end up running around 400 watts from what I've seen. So, and if you get like the newer 6900 XTs, they cost more. They come with a higher bin special version of the Navi 21 GPU. So like the Navi 21 XTX was used in the 6900 XT, and now what are they calling it? Like the XTXH is like a specially binned version of the Navi 21 that will hit 2.7, 2.8 gigahertz with factory overclocks, and I suspect those cards are probably pushing 400, 450 watts at that point. So both companies can go very high on the power if they want to, but it ends up kind of wash. Features and technology like DLSS, even though that kind of goes in performance, you've got things like your NVIDIA broadcast, and it's like, hey, this blurry thing where I turn on my background blur, that works really well. It works better than the stuff built into our StreamYard app or Zoom. So I give NVIDIA a slight advantage in your features and technology just because they've got some better stuff. I think their tensor cores and their ray tracing cores are faster. And G-Sync, despite the fact that FreeSync and G-Sync sort of overlap, and you go, oh, well, they both do variable rate refresh. In practice, I got to give G-Sync the edge. Like it's sad because it costs more, but if you get a high-end G-Sync monitor and you pair it with an NVIDIA GPU, the experience tends to be better from what I've seen personally than if you get an AMD FreeSync monitor and pair it with an AMD GPU. And you compare FreeSync monitors with NVIDIA graphics cards now, whereas you can't go the other way because NVIDIA. So slight edge to features in features and technology goes to NVIDIA, and then wrapped it up with like drivers and softwares. I know some people have really strong feelings about the drivers and software. I've used both a lot, and I just don't see like a really good reason to say one of them is clearly better. Like I called that a tie. So net result, it's like, well, I think the 3090 is the better, more desirable card, but at current prices, you can't buy either one. But if you could, like $1,500 to $2,000 for the 6900 XT versus $2,000 to $3,000 for the 3090. That's a huge chunk of change, and I can't recommend buying either one, but apparently the miners can, so they both remain sold out and back ordered. How's that for a long-winded coverage of all things GPU?
So I've got some questions, and if you're watching and you have some questions as well, definitely drop them in. But so when you did your article, oh, hello there.
This is my son. He wanted to be on the internet.
Hi.
Fame and fortune. Well, to either of you, he can answer as well. So when you wrote your article, you broke down the different categories from most important to least important, and you started with gaming performance. And then you went to price, features, and technology, and then power and efficiency. I was kind of surprised by that. Is that not as big of a factor right now because both cards are just so well and we're so advanced in those areas now?
Yeah, I mean, like power and efficiency, like because they're pretty much at parity, like I don't think it matters as much. Like if you're on a laptop, power matters a lot. If Caleb, what do you think? Oh, he's hiding again. If you're not on a laptop, you're on your desktop. The difference between a 300 watt and a 350 watt power or graphics card it's not like that big of a deal. Like if you're talking about 150 watts versus 300 watts, like that's pretty huge, and that's more heat and all these other factors. But these are both very hot, powerful, need great cooling graphics cards, and so I just don't feel like it's super important. I mean, like it goes back to as far as like if you wanted to pull up history, like the R9 290 290X launch from AMD. At the time, a lot of people were like, oh, well, they're kind of as fast as NVIDIA, but they use more power and it's horrible. And so the reviewers kind of panned them for it. And yet the public was just like, whatever, we don't care about 50 watts extra. We don't care about 100 watts extra. And I've kind of taken that approach as well. I'm like, if everything else is equal and you use less power, that's great. But pretty much nothing is ever equal. I'm going to have to kick my kid out of my office in a second here. I left the door open. Shame on me.
Well, here's a comment from Ruru2M saying, I don't think people are complaining about 50-watt difference power draw on a $1,500 card. So there it is. Yeah, so I know you, Michelle, you do a lot of our keeping up on the Newegg shuffle and on stock. I know you're saying it's still not widely available, but has it gotten any better?
In general, no. The Newegg shuffle does certainly help if you're lucky enough to get it, but like Jared said, even then the prices are marked up quite a bit, and it's weird, but NVIDIA for once is cheaper than AMD on the Newegg shuffle, which again is another point in its favor because it's not only got better ray tracing and better DLSS, but now you can get it for a lower cost. Granted, the AMD deals are usually more expensive because they're bundled with motherboards or power supplies, but that's less, a great value and more Newegg being like, well, this is the only way people can buy these cards, so we might as well attach some extra items to them and try to move those as well.
Yeah, and I have to think like a big part of it is probably just availability, like the quantities available. Whatever else people want to say about availability, where they're saying like, oh, none of these cards are available. You look on the Steam hardware survey and, grains of salt. We don't know exactly how they're conducting all of those statistics, but the RTX 3080, 3070, 3090, I think even the 3060 Ti all show up with anywhere from like 0.3% for 3090 up to like over 1% for the 3070. So, if 1% of people surveyed on Steam are using a 3070, I'm like, there's tens of millions. I don't know how many active Steam users there are these days, but let's say it's make it easy, 100 million. That means there's 1 million people with the 3070 that are on Steam theoretically, versus AMD. None of their big Navi or RDNA 2 graphics cards show up on the Steam hardware survey yet, and it's like, well, there's this other category and maybe they fall in there and maybe they're actually higher, but they just haven't been pulled out, or maybe there's differences in hardware IDs or some other factor that we don't know what Valve does with their survey, but all indications are that they're not trying to hide good AMD numbers. It's just they're not above that threshold, which is like 0.15%. Like if your GPU doesn't have at least 0.15% of the market share, then it doesn't show up as an actual line item in the hardware survey, so that it ends up with 100 GPUs rather than 2 or 300 GPUs. So I think there's a lot more NVIDIA cards being manufactured and sold, despite the fact that they're all still sold out.
Part of me has to wonder if that RTX stock that's showing up on the Steam survey is from things like pre-built and laptops and net cafes, sort of, instead of individuals, things from bigger businesses that can actually get their hold on these things easily enough.
And you think the net cafes have the latest GPUs though?
Well, there was a deal with the cafes. I want to say it's a couple of years ago, but at one point the Steam hardware survey counted hardware based off of user logins, and so the net cafes, the internet stuff got counted a lot more often, and it caused like I want to say it's in the 1060 sky time frame, and it caused this like blip where the 1060 numbers skyrocketed, and people are like, wait, why is 1060 selling so much? And at some point Steam fixed this hardware survey so that it only counts a PC once, is my understanding. So it doesn't matter if 40 people use the same PC at a net cafe in a week. In a day, sorry. I think there's more than 40 in a week, but it won't get counted a whole bunch of times on Steam. So theoretically, again, like, they're not doing full disclosure of the statistics. I've studied statistics and stuff. Like, it's actually a subject that I enjoyed. You know, some people hate statistics. I'm like, no, actually, I thought it was pretty cool. It's interesting to see how this stuff should be done. And then you go out and you start looking at like the polling used for elections or for Steam hardware survey. And I'm like, I don't think they're doing like fully correct statistics because it's harder and it takes more time and money. And so they just kind of roll with something that they can get up, and it's as good as you can get. So
it's also a good point. Another comment from Ruru2M says net cafes probably aren't ordering new hardware due to COVID and public gatherings.
They're all mining.
Hopefully that'll be different soon. But yeah, that's true. There's is a net cafe with pretty up-to-date hardware in New York that I used to visit a lot, but I haven't been to it since over a year now. So
we had some stories in the past few months where like there were some Chinese net cafes that converted all of their laptops and GPUs into doing cryptocurrency mining, because they're like, well, we can't have people come because of COVID, and we actually make more money doing cryptocurrency mining. So that's kind of like as if to add insult to injury, right? Like, oh, those GPUs you can't buy. Well, the net cafe managed to buy them, and they're using them for mining.
While we have you, actually, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on laptop mining? Because that was one of those big pictures from the net cafes, and I can't imagine it's a good time.
Like, I would not do that. I like some of them. You see that they pull the laptop apart, so they take off the bottom cover, and then they put like a big box fan blowing down on it. I'm like, okay, if you do that, you're probably going to be okay. But if you're running a fully closed up laptop, those suckers just are not made to go 24/7 100% load on your graphics card. I mean, I've used to test laptops a lot for AnandTech back in the day, and I had numerous gaming laptops where after weeks or months, like some of them would get flaky, like the ones that I kept for longer periods. When I was with PC Gamer, I did like their performance analysis sponsored with MSI, and so MSI said, hey, well, we want you to test not just MSI graphics cards, but throw in a few laptops. So I had 3 MSI laptops, one with a 2080, one with a 2070, and one with a 2060, right? And I had all 3 of those for like a year and a half, and I had a monthly deal where I'd sit there and test them and run gaming benchmarks on them, whatever hot new game came out. And I will tell you, like, one of those, I think it was the 3070, started having issues. It was not working very well. And I had, like, these things were not used hard. Like, they were tested once a month kind of thing, and it still had problems. And I'm like, gosh, like, I think it was a GS75 or some such, but I'm like, if you can have a thin and light laptop that's only used like a couple times a month have problems, like, what's mining going to do to it? So, I mean, I wouldn't do that on a laptop.
Well, speaking of, Jared, we do have a question regarding how 3090 performance is when it comes to crypto mining.
They're fast. In terms of cryptocurrency mining, the 3090 is nearly double the performance in Ethereum compared to the 6900 XT, which is why it costs nearly twice as much on like eBay and places, because the miners are doing the math and they're like, hey, we can break even in 7 months, so we'll pay more. I mean, like, if you look on, we've got an Ethereum mining articles where we run through all their hash rates, but those hash rates for Ethereum mining correlate extremely well with the prices you see for the graphics cards on eBay. So like the 6700 XT, technically it's a faster gaming card than the 3060 12 gigabyte. But for mining purposes, now that the 3060 got like that unlocked driver accidentally, they both do around 46 to 48 mega hash per second. And they both sell for about $900, $920 on eBay. Whereas their their official prices, like the 3060 is supposed to be 329 and the 6700 XT is supposed to be 479. So it's like that's a big difference in price, and in gaming performance, the 6700 XT is probably like 20-30% faster at least. I'd have to pull up the actual numbers to give you a real answer there, but like there's just such a strong correlation with cryptocurrency mining on eBay prices that it's obvious what people are buying them for. Like no gamer, I think, should go out and spend $3,000 for 3090.
And then just to be sure, there are no restrictions in terms of mining on that card, correct?
Yeah, right now there are none. There's this question, like, so the 3080 Ti is supposed to be coming soon. Like, there's lots of indications 3080 Ti will probably land next month, and possibly a 3070 Ti as well. And if those do land, we can expect NVIDIA will be implementing an Ethereum anti-mining lock on both of those. The question is, will it get cracked? I mean, like someone,
NVIDIA?
yeah, like I don't think that's going to happen again with an accidental publishing of a dev driver that unlocks performance. But my thing is, like, someone has posted the first 3080 Ti leaked performance was for Ethereum mining, and it was doing 120 mega hash, which is, what you would expect because you overclock the memory and it's got a 384-bit memory interface just like the 3090. And even though it has half the RAM, it doesn't actually matter for Ethereum because Ethereum only needs about 4.5 gigabytes right now. And so the 3080 Ti is just as fast as mining as the 3090 until the lock gets implemented. And so my question is, like, NVIDIA can change device IDs, they can change the firmware and stuff. The card's not released, but I'm like, here's someone with pre-release access to this hardware who's mining on it. And, if they can figure out how to get the card up and running mining, like, will the cards actually stay locked for public consumption when it comes to mining, or will the big cryptocurrency mining farms figure out workarounds? I mean, again, you look at the launch of the 3060, and even when that had a mining lock implemented, the prices were selling at, as though it didn't have the lock. And so either the miners knew how to get around the lock already, or they just had faith that someone would figure it out.
Value-wise, is the 3090 worth it, you think, compared to other NVIDIA cards, like if you want to go in for mining?
You know, it's tough to say. Like, mining wise, I want to say the 3080 does like 95 mega hash roughly. And you're looking at 125 maybe with overclocking. Both of the 3080 and the 3090 cards, like, you got to be careful on the GDDR6 memory. It runs hot. So like the Founders editions are particularly notorious for having poor memory cooling, and so they end up running hotter. And so miners probably should either pull the cards apart and replace the thermal pads on the memory, or make sure you get like a card that is known to have better memory cooling, because if you're running with your memory at 104 to 110 degrees Celsius, like that's kind of like the laptop thing. I don't think that's going to end well. It might last 6 months, it might last a year, but 2 years down the road, I don't think that GPU will be running properly unless you've managed to replace the thermal pads and do something to improve the cooling.
Hey, well, maybe this crypto wave will be done by then, huh?
Yeah, I mean, the way things are going, like, even if cryptocurrency, like, what do you call it, is capsized right now, just took a dive and went under, we'd still be dealing with shortages. We were seeing those with the 3080, 3090 at launch before the mining boom took off, and nothing has really changed to fully alleviate that. People still want upgrades. More people are working from home. More people are at home playing games. So, all indications are, even if cryptocurrency died right now, you would have GPU shortages probably throughout the rest of this year and into 2022. And like the rumors are showing that NVIDIA's next generation Hopper GPUs are probably going to come out in 2022, and it's like I'm worried that it will be like the RTX 20 series launch, where all of the prices jumped up quite a bit. So like the 1070 was a $380 card, the 2070 was a $600 card, with the non-founders edition costing $500. And there was a cryptocurrency boom in 2017, 2018 that also contributed to that. So if Hopper launches in 2022 and it has, better mining performance and all this other stuff, whatever happens, I think you'll see generational pricing will take a jump up from where it officially is on the 3070, or on the 30 series, so that it looks more like, oh, well, the 3070 is supposed to cost $500, but people are paying well over $1,000 for it. So maybe it should have been a $750 card or some such. And I could easily see that happening with like the 4070 and 4080 and 4090 and all those cards, like where NVIDIA just goes, it's easier to reduce prices than to raise it. So let's start our contract prices high. And if demand is low, then we'll bring them down. But I'm not looking forward to finding out what happens there.
We also have a few good points from commenters regarding what will happen if older cards start to get replaced, or if crypto tanks. River2M says that miners will liquidate their inventory and flood the market, which of course
that's a common argument. I don't actually buy it. I think the largest miners, I think they kept mining. Like, there's no real indication, if you look at the difficulty, that there was a wide exodus of big miners. I think hobbyists, like a gamer mining, I think they would exit the mining scene. So if you had some guy who bought like 10 GPUs and was mining at his house, I think they might exit and sell. But I think your professional mining farms with thousands and thousands of things, I think they're in this for the long haul, and they're not going to sell it off.
Well, Jared, I know you have to go.
Yeah, I gotta go get a vaccine. Woo!
Get that B card. Well, thank you so much for stopping by. We'll catch you later.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, you guys. Have fun.
See you, Jared. So for those who can't get enough of Jared or enough of the benchmarks, whichever you like more, I don't know. Definitely head to that website, tomshardware.com. You can see the full face-off between the two cards, all those benchmarks, all of that good Jared insight. But in the meantime, we do have Michelle here. And you, Michelle, you review a lot of laptops and systems for Tom's Hardware, from gaming laptops, premium clamshells, 2-in-1s. But the ZenBook, the Asus ZenBook 13, you just reviewed for us. It actually stood out so much that you gave it our Editor's Choice Award, which means it's the best in its category. So I know it's packing an AMD Ryzen 7 5800U CPU, which has integrated AMD Radeon Vega graphics. What else can you tell us about this machine?
So I have it right here. This is the Asus ZenBook 13, followed by a bunch of letters for the model number. And it's generally it is both very special and very normal. Design-wise, it's a fairly typical thin and light ZenBook. ZenBook usually is a sort of mid-range thin and light, but this is the first laptop we've looked at with a Ryzen 5000U series CPU, and that means that this thing is powerful, but it's still priced like a ZenBook, so it's also pretty cheap. So I sent over charts, Sharon, if you want to pull up the data.
Give me one moment. Okay.
Perfect. So we tested this thing. You can see it scores in red. We tested the ZenBook 13 against the MacBook Pro with the M1 chip in it, the HP Spectre X360 which has an Intel Core i7-1165 G7, and the Dell XPS 13, which has the same chip. And this laptop, despite costing a maximum of $1,000, depending on your configuration, consistently beat its competitors on productivity on all of our tests. So if you look at Geekbench 5, it's a little lower than the Spectre X360 14 and the XPS 13, but it's still very much in line with the other laptops. If you look at file transfer speeds,
Just real quick, Michelle, this is a 4-core chip in your ZenBook?
That's a very good question. I have to look that up real quickly.
Guess I'm just considering because when it comes to the multi-core scores,
This is an 8-core chip.
Okay, got you. Sorry, my screens are bugging out a little bit, but here we go. So this is an 8-core chip, you said?
Yes.
And the other ones are, I think, what, fewer cores then?
I think the M1 is 8-core as well. And if I check right now, the Intel i7 11th gen is 4 cores.
Okay. So yeah, Ruru2 is asking, so this is an 8-core laptop for under 1K?
Yes.
All righty. So you wanted to take a look at the next chart, which would be our file transfer test. So let me pull those up very smoothly and effortlessly. You'll see. So, hold on. Give me one moment.
No worries. So part of what makes this laptop so appealing is mostly its competitors' pricing, because it either beats or is very close to its competition in pretty much all of our productivity benchmarks. It has a display, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that's not like top of its class, but is still plenty respectable. It has a long battery life, and it costs $1,000, whereas the Intel laptops that we compared it to cost about $1,600, and the MacBook Pro, being an Apple, costs $1,900 as we tested it.
Okay, so in this file transfer test, we're seeing that it's outshining all of these competitor machines, which are all more expensive.
Correct. Now, granted, file transfers don't have as much to do with CPU as the SSD, so it tends to be a little bit more individualized per machine.
Okay.
But this is still very promising to see.
Okay, and then we have Handbrake. So this is transcoding from a video from 4K to 1080p, correct?
Correct. This is using Handbrake, which is a free program. And this is one of the tests where a lower number is better. So those Intel laptops with the 18 minutes are actually towards the bottom of our benchmarks. The MacBook Pro was the only one to beat the ZenBook here by, a couple of minutes, which is decent, but not by like half the time.
Alrighty, and then we have, so this is our Cinebench, or your Cinebench. You did the hard work. So what are we looking at here?
Cinebench, this one isn't a comparative test so much as just a general stress test that we like to run on all the machines we test, just to see how they hold up over an extended work session. You can see that it drops off a little bit there from around 8,500 to 7,900, but that's pretty normal. Usually these laptops, what we do for our Cinebench tests is we run Cinebench R20, or now R23, although this was done back when we did R20, 20 times in a row, and see how well they what the average score is, what the thermals are throughout, generally how well they hold up. And it's not uncommon for these machines to start with higher scores and then drop down as we get further into the tests and they get hotter.
Okay, so this is pretty stable performance right here.
Correct.
Awesome. And then some of my favorite charts coming up, the display chart, which I've accidentally opened.
We're going to edit this live. But no, the display charts are actually very promising here, because one of the things that you typically tend to see on these mid-range laptops that are surprisingly high performing is that they cut corners on things like the keyboard or the audio or the display in order to maintain that price while still being so strong. And you can see that the ZenBook 13 here with the Ryzen chip does not do that. We're having a little bit of chart difficulties, but we'll be back to it in a second. But generally, this has a color gamut on par with competition, as well as a brightness. And that's especially exciting to see when compared to the MacBook. Apple being well known for their sort of high quality displays. You know, it's brighter than the ZenBook, but when it comes to color gamut, the ZenBook actually beats it.
And is this an OLED screen on the laptop?
This is an OLED screen, yes.
So how much of an impact did you find that to have? Like, was it that much of a difference to have an OLED panel versus your standard LED?
You know, I usually think that OLED tends to have a lot deeper blacks, which is especially nice in my office that I work from home in. I'm right next to a big bright window. Didn't necessarily have that in the old communal office. And so, you know, having a higher contrast, even just for work, helps me maintain focus, not get as much glare. And then, you know, it's great for watching content.
I feel like because this is a decently priced machine, I'm kind of surprised to see OLED in a laptop at this price. Are you fine? Is it getting cheaper, at least in terms of laptops?
You know, this is the first OLED laptop that I've reviewed in a little bit, so I'll have to get a few more in order to see how the trend is going. But I will know that when I started reviewing laptops for Tom's Hardware a few years ago, not everything had IPS. It was a feature that I really wanted to say, like when I reviewed a laptop, hey, this has an IPS screen, but now almost everything we review has a default IPS. So I'm curious to see if OLED ends up going down that track as well.
Very cool. And so I think we still have our battery life chart, and I'm going to smoothly share it this time.
They just get a secret behind the scenes look at the Tom's Hardware process.
It's something about me trying to full screen it. But here you go. This is your battery test number. So this is hours and minutes. ZenBook is at 13 hours and 36 minutes.
Correct. So I tend to think that for a thin and light, anything over 10 hours is acceptable. So 13 hours is great. And again, the MacBook was the only one to beat it, and Apple's pretty well known for their battery life, so no surprises there.
Nice. So we do have some questions. So what's the final deal on pricing and release date? Because BP said they'd buy the damn thing today if they could find a place to buy it.
So this laptop, you may have seen some reviews from it coming out about a month ago. However, it's not out quite yet, and we don't have information from Asus as to an official release date that we can share. We also don't have an official pricing info that we can share, but we can share the official price range that they told us, which is $750 to $1,000. This one being one of the higher end configurations that they sent us. So, you know, we can't tell you, but you can kind of put two and two together there to figure out about what you'd be spending on this machine.
So getting back to our idea of this, you know, winning an award, being kind of the best in its category right now, is that partial? Like, is that more because of the chip? Because of how AMD is always, you know, a good value typically, especially when it comes to their chips. And so is it just because it has that chip and it's one of the few laptops that we know about or have tested? Or is it the whole unit? So even when we see more Ryzen 5000 laptops, this will still be at the top.
So that's a very good question, because I I like ZenBooks. I'm typically not blown away by them. So as we see more Ryzen 5000U ultra portables, I would not be surprised to see this, falling down in comparison. But this is, again, the first Ryzen 5000U laptop that we've looked at, and I was just blown away by this chip's value and its performance compared to Tiger Lake and even the M1 for the price. So I mostly give the award based on that chip. The laptop itself is okay. It's just not much of a difference from previous ZenBooks. You have this little sort of foot at the bottom so that when you lift up the screen, the keyboard sort of lifts off your desk a little bit. You have a fairly typical membrane keyboard with a chiclet, chiclet keys.
That looks bad. That
Yep,
looks
it
flat
looks
and
what?
bad. It looks flat and bad. Am I wrong?
I mean, it's comfortable. I got my average words per minute on it, but it doesn't, stand out in any particular way. The one feature ZenBook does have that I'm trying to get on screen to help it stand out. Oh, it just made a noise. Is it has this thing. So it has the screen pad numpad built into the touchpad. If you hold your hand on one of these icons in the top right corner of the touchpad for a little bit, you'll get these numbers on screen, which you can then enter like actual numbers on a number pad. You can even move your mouse around while it's active if you want to, although you might do some accidental number presses there. And then you can slide from the left to open the calculator as a shortcut. But that's about it that it does for you. And if you do a lot of data entry, maybe it's useful. Although I assume if you do a lot of data entry, you're going to want more than, touch-based input, which is imprecise and not very fast, which is the whole point of this thing. It doesn't, add to the price in any way, and you can easily ignore it. So I don't really think it's that much of a big deal. But it definitely isn't a bonus to me in terms of like wanting to buy this particular laptop.
That's awesome. I'm glad the touchpad doesn't come at a premium because it's one of those things I'm like, oh, that could be cool, but I'm definitely like, I'd have to reorganize my workflow to make it part of like my intuitive daily use.
Exactly. So this is like the lightest, most unobtrusive version of the screen pad technology, which is just the number pad, which is probably why it doesn't come at a premium. Asus has other screen pads out there, which will like turn your touchpad into a whole secondary display. You can put YouTube videos on it. You can go through your Spotify playlists. It's like a little smartphone on your laptop. It's not an amazing experience for that. In my one time reviewing a laptop with that either, just because it's such small real estate and the menu interface still needs some work. But that is where you would see the premiums being applied, and that's not on this model.
Cool. So we have a couple questions. First, it's basic. There's no GPU. So you have
yes. So pretty
graphics,
much
right?
all of our wow, it won't be quiet. Pretty much all of our ultra portables, there's no GPU. So this one uses Radeon integrated Vega graphics, correct? And then the M1 uses M1 graphics, and the Intel ones, do they use UHD or they use Iris Xe, which I would expect.
So you didn't do any even light gaming, did you?
I did not. In the past, we've done gaming on these laptops just like anecdotally, but we've decided that's not really what these laptops are sold for. So it's probably best not to even give people the idea that they should be buying this for gaming.
Fair enough. And then in regard to the OLED display, Ruru2 is asking if OLED is more power efficient.
That's a very good question. I don't 100% know that off the top of my head because I'm not a monitor expert. I know that you review a lot of our monitors, Sharon. Do you know?
Expert is a big word, but so generally not. But what I will say is a lot of times when people or vendors put OLED into a laptop, they also go with 4K because then you get the 4K OLED, and 4K actually is going to eat up more of your battery life than if you were at 1080p or 1440p, etc. So on its own, no, it shouldn't be more or less power efficient. But what is the resolution of the screen, Michelle?
That's a very good point, which I wouldn't have thought to bring up if we didn't get that question. This is a full HD resolution with like a classic 16:9 aspect ratio. So this is just 1920 by 1080, which is kind of unique to see an OLED on, and might be part of why it doesn't eat up a ton of power despite being OLED.
And then just for reference, here are the battery numbers again. You could see the ZenBook is kind of like in the middle, 13 and a half hours, where the MacBook's at 16 and a half hours.
Correct.
And then Dell's at 11. So
And all of these battery tests are done with the screens at an average 150 nits of brightness. We have a custom program that browses the web, streams video, and runs OpenGL tests over Wi-Fi for us, basically until the laptops poop out. So can I say that on YouTube?
Poop? Yeah, you could say poop. Giving permission. Now I said it too. One thing I will say, in terms of OLED in general, like if you're looking at a desktop monitor, they tend to be less bright than, let's say, like a really good LED with full array local dimming backlight. So pretty much the best LED backlight you can get before heading into like OLED mini LED territory. So in that theory, like if it was less dim, that would help you with your battery life, but you're in the laptop, which is obviously easier to get more nits in that smaller form factor. You're just as bright as like your typical laptop. So you weren't saving any power there. So just some food for thought.
If you see me looking off to the side, it's because I'm double checking my notes. While I know that the stats make the color look great on this, which is true, the brightness is great, there are a few issues from my anecdotal experience watching it, which you can kind of see on the screen here. This is the one issue I would have with this screen is that it's very reflective. So you kind of need to be cognizant of where you're using it, what angles you're facing it, that sort of thing.
Awesome. Well, if you want to know more about the laptop, Michelle's Asus ZenBook 13 is live on our site right now. You could look deeper at her benchmarks and more of her anecdotal experience. I think we've gone through all of our questions, so I'm just going to thank all of you for tuning in and plead with you to like us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube. All that fun stuff makes us feel good inside. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks to Jared, wherever you are now. And Michelle, of course.
Jared's busy getting his Windows 10. I was trying to make a joke. He's busy getting his first patch for for the COVID-19 bug.
Awesome. We love it. Well, thank you all for tuning in. That is our show. We'll see you next Thursday.